So, you're thinking about getting some reptiles, huh? But you're a little confused about what all you're gonna need. I mean, probably PetSmart told you need a tank and a light. Maybe they even told you a heating rock and that's it, aside from your snake. But unfortunately, that's actually nowhere near the case. So, let's look at what all I use on a pretty regular basis, shall we? So, me and Kakashi here have broken down what I use on a regular basis in a couple of categories. Now, all of those things I'm going to talk about I personally deem as important, though I have them kind of sectioned off in what I would say is the most important to least important, though once again, these are all decently important things to have, especially if you have more than one reptile. So for starters, I'm going to start this off with a heat gun. So what the heat gun is, it's to check temperatures in your cages. Super easy. All you hit the button, little laser there, it'll tell you the exact temperature of whatever surface the light was just on. So you guys are actually at 82.9 degrees right now, and it'll give you a very accurate reading. I temp gun behind my mats and thermostats quite often just to make sure everything's still working, which I highly suggest that you do. I also use the temp gun to check water temperatures when I do baths. We did a mite treatment here recently. I used the temp gun to check the temperature of the coconut oil that I was rubbing on the Python iota. I mean, realistically, knowing the temperatures of what you're doing is super important, especially with some species which can be very hypersensitive to temperature. That can cause neurological damage or even death in a lot of snakes and lizards if things are too hot or too cold, or you transition them too quickly. So let's go ahead and let that transition us into probably the most important thing, and that is going to be a thermostat. Now, what the thermostat does is, so a lot of snakes need underbelly heat, so that you have a heating mat plugged up to the bottom of the tank. So the heating mat, all it does is it just heats up and heats the tank. Now, by itself, this thing will just run. I mean, I've seen, there's like a Brian Barjak video, something that says that you can put a heating mat on a glass tank and it'll stay like 92, 93 degrees, and that's an absolute lie. My probe moved at one point because these thermostats come with a little probe that basically what the thermostat does is you plug the heating mat into it. The probe reads the temperature. Once temperature hits a certain heat, it will cut the mat off until it needs to cut back on to stay warm, so that nothing ever gets too hot or too cold. You leave them running 24 hours a day. All of my snakes are on heating mats and thermostats. But now, one time the little probe moved, so it was not close enough to the heat mat as it should be. And so the heat mat just kept heating up. I went to, like I said, I randomly temp every day just to check. And the temperature in the cage was like 109 degrees. And that's from where that probe had moved, and that heat mat just kept heating up. So I don't know why or how people suggest or tell you to use a heat mat without a thermostat. They don't even sell the thermostats at PetSmart, but they sell the heat mat, if that tells you anything, and that's just absolutely bonkers to me. But the thermostat is probably the most important piece of equipment when dealing with these reptiles. So moving on from there, the next thing I would say is in this most important category is probably going to be either a spray bottle or a mister. So I have both here to show you. Let me get Kakashi situated. So just a regular old spray bottle, or personally what I use for most of my misting for the big crested gecko, arboreal tank you see back there, or Mitsuki the boa, I have one of these $10 garden sprayers, these things here, which I use to mist, daily Pac-Man frog, leopard gecko, all of it. So, and the reason those are important is because a lot of these guys are super sensitive to their humidity requirements. So another important thing is the hydrometer. I have that on here. We'll talk about that here in a minute. It's not listed on the most important because for a lot of these species, Now, I do not suggest doing this. This is not all what I'm saying, because I do, once again, think you should have a hydrometer. All of these are items I deem important. But you can, for some not so super sensitive to humidity creatures, such as the corn snakes here, you can get away without having a hydrometer, but that comes with a lot of experience in knowing how wet your substrate is and how that correlates into the tank and the humidity in the tank, and that comes with a lot of doing and finagling in time. So hydrometer is kind of honestly on the teeter-totter between have to have important and highly important. Still have to have, but you understand what I'm saying. And last in that first bracket is going to be a simple notebook and a piece of paper or a calendar. And so I always take notes for anything going on in my reptile room. I actually have a giant calendar on the wall here, which I'll show you a picture of, that every day when something happens, it gets marked: feeding, sheds, going into bloom, moving tanks, any of it. I have a running log of all activities here in the reptile room, and that's so I can go back and look at the feeding log. I can go back and check shed cycles. I just have a running log of how everybody's doing when everybody's eating, and if I start to notice a problem, I can go back and look and see when things started to go off of pattern. So now for the second category, we're going to talk about the really highly important things, and we're going to start it off with the hydrometer. So what the hydrometer is it is a little gauge that goes inside the tank, and it will tell you how humid the tank is. I do suggest getting a digital one as opposed to the analog ones. I've had really bad luck with the analog ones. I had two in a tank beside each other at one point, and they gave me like a 10 to 15 degree different reading, and then when I put the digital one in there, I got a 13 degree different reading from one and like a 7 degree different reading from the other. So I mean, just definitely go with the digital. And so I'll show you a clip of those. I have them in all of my tanks. I also get a digital thermometer, and it's the same thing, just tells you how hot it is, that particular section of the cage. The hydrometer needs to be positioned about level where the snake would be, so you know what the humidity of where the actual reptile or whatever is going in the enclosure is. Next, I would suggest a weight scale. So the weight scale, I use this to measure growth, which you can kind of use for health. And it's super simple. This just turns on, you put a bowl on it, tear the bowl, which sets the scale to 0, put the snake in the bowl, tell you how many grams the snake is. Most keepers gauge the size and health of their snakes off of the weight in grams as opposed to the actual length of the snake, and the scale helps with that. A lot of people, when you start talking online and need help or anything, or start talking about your reptiles, they will commonly ask you how many grams, how big the snake is. So that's just a good thing to have and some good information to have. You can also check when you need to up their feeders and whatnot based on their weight. So having a scale is definitely good for that. A water filter also is on this section of the list. Now I have a Pac-Man frog, and so water quality for that guy is extremely important. They breathe through their skin. So chlorine-free filtered water all day, every day for him, and that's actually what all of my reptiles get. And so instead of buying that ReptiSafe, I bought we have one of those really nice carbon Brita filters that we filter and clean all of our water that gets used here in the reptile room, and even the one in the spray and mister, just to keep that in mind. Also on this part of the list is a heater, just a cheapo. I have a little, I'll show you here, a little $16 heater from Family Dollar that I use to randomly boost the temperatures in my room, and I also have it with the heat kind of gauged down, pointed at the frog enclosure to keep it at temp, because there is no heating pad or anything on the frog enclosure, because once it gets warm here in another week or two, really the frog's going to be perfectly fine just at room temperature throughout the day and night here where I'm located. So and then the last thing on the second tier of important things is going to be tongs. So I have a couple here. I have about to lose my pen. So we have just regular old tongs. I use these for feeding the snakes mostly. So these I've noticed for grabbing especially with the rats with the boa, they get heavy. It's kind of hard to hold on to them sometimes. These you can grab, twist, kind of like a spaghetti noodle, and you get a pretty good grip on the rat. Some people feed their big snakes by hand. I mean, I would honestly trust to do that with Minzuki. It just seems like leaves room for some mistakes, or maybe even to let the snake realize that hands are food. So that I always use tongs. For my smaller guys, my lizards, my bearded dragon, the Pac-Man frog, I use the rubber-coated tongs. And this is especially with the Pac-Man frog because half the time he attacks the tongs as opposed to the food. And so these rubber-coated tongs really help for something you're worried about, maybe biting the tongs, because biting that metal can't be comfortable, you know. So the last tier we're going to get into, still pretty important things. The things you can kind of get away with not having, and I'll somewhat explain how. The first thing I would suggest is different size tubs. And there's quite a few reasons for that, actually. The first one is cheap hides. As you can see, here's an example of one I made out of just a piece of Tupperware. I also have larger ones here. This is a corn snake and the ball python bath for now, until the ball python gets a little bit bigger. And then I have, I'll attach a video here, a gigantic tub which we made the boa constrictor in. We attached a heater up to it. You can also put the thermostat, a heating pad on the bottom of the bathtub, and then put a probe into the water if the snake needs to bathe for a long time, like we did when we did the mite treatment for iota, for example. And so, not to mention just storage, you know, dead mice and rats in the freezer, extra coconut fiber. I also have, I got these because I have some in my corn snake enclosures, but so this was like $2 for this whole pack of 3, but I'm gonna, or a pack of 5, excuse me, but I'm gonna turn this into a human hide for the ball python iota. So, which leads me into the next item, which is going to be a torch, which I think I left in the laundry room. I have a butane torch. I'll see if I can get a clip of that. Don't ask me why I have a butane torch, just out and about and just have it, just don't ask. But the butane torch or a lighter, and the reason I say have those things is because when you make hides, so like I cut this plastic here to make a hide, and as you can see there, this is a nice smooth rounded edge, and that's because I hit it with the torch and actually melted it if you look closely. When you cut that plastic, a lot of the time it's sharp, it's got some sharp points, some sharp edges, and so I take a lighter or a torch, melt it down. The torch works better than the lighter. The lighters burn out pretty quick, especially if you use the thicker plastic tubs here. So moving on, I would also probably suggest screen clips, and what that is are these things here. So for most enclosures, you'll have just a regular old screen lid. I don't have one I can really show you right this second. They just literally just bloop right on top of the cage. So a lot of snakes are actually strong enough to really get out of that, honestly, with no problem. So the screen clips are super cool. They just really bend and clip into place, clip the screen down. $2.99 at the pet shop. I mean, that's definitely something you should definitely have. I would also suggest having some moss to do like the human hides I was showing you, or even just to up the humidity in your enclosures. So speaking of humidity though, I would also have, and this is also on the list, is going to be different substrates. And I use coconut fiber for most of my snakes. Now, I would suggest also always having dry coconut fiber on deck. So now, coconut fiber is weird. I know you need to freeze it for 2 days and then let it thaw. It comes a little moist. You have to set it out and let it dry. You know what I mean? And so, because you got to kill all the nits and stuff in it. So once it's set out and dried, I always try to keep some dry on deck, because there have been plenty of times where one of my guys here will have knocked over their water bowl exploring around the cage, and the humidity rises too high in the enclosure. It's super easy to up humidity. It's actually kind of difficult to lower humidity, and I seem to have problems with high humidity here, but we also live on the coast. That's probably why, to be honest with you. So I definitely suggest having different types of substrate in case you need to make some quick changes on the fly, and also dry substrate just in case, because you know that 2 to 3 day, like, go bag coconut fiber, freeze it, wait 48 hours for the mites to die, wait for it to thaw so it's not too cold for the snake, and then maybe have to let it dry out some. That's too much of a process sometimes, depending. But the reason I say you could kind of skirt past that is, I mean, for most of these guys, you could honestly put down like newspaper or paper towels and it's perfectly fine. Some people keep them on that forever. I mean, I had iota on paper towels for the mite treatment, but I prefer to keep most of mine on substrate. They all tend to, especially the corns, Kakashi here has a little layer, but they tend to like to dig and burrow. And then last on this list that we have here, I'm going to say you should probably grab yourself one of these bad boys, power drill. So I can't tell you how surprised I was at the amount of times that I actually needed to just do general construction, fix enclosures, fix cabinets, you know. And then once you start getting into multiple reptiles, or if you get things with high humidity that need like tubs, puncturing holes in the tubs, let me tell you, that is a chore way more than I ever anticipated. At first I tried to use just a regular old, like Phillips head drill bit, excuse me, and like, I mean, I could just, my forearm, my right arm forearm is probably about 3 times as muscular as my left, just from drilling holes in tubs. So then I got the spiral drill taps and steel. That was just nothing. So finally, what I ended up getting was, I suggest if you're going to be doing tubs, just spend the $6 and get these here. Just so quick, so easy, so effortless, makes perfect holes. Also doesn't warp the plastic top from where you're pushing at it like I did with the Phillips head screwdriver trying to press through it. So, well, I do believe that taps out my must-have tools of the trade video. So if you guys have any questions or think I left anything out or want to know or see specifically anything or how anything works, just let me know down below. Like and subscribe. You guys have a great day. Say bye, Kakashi. Bye.